All right. Keep an eye on that. We're going to go ahead and get started, everybody. Thank you, first of all, so much for joining us on this Thursday evening. We're going to be hanging out for the next hour, and we're going to be talking all about feeding our bees in the valley, and maybe even talk a little bit about dearth and that kind of thing. It's kind of a challenge here, and so we're really, really fortunate to have our guest speaker with us to kind of go through that and then maybe even answer some questions at the end. So first of all, we are the Big Valley Beekeepers Guild. We are a brand new beekeeping club. This is only our second year, well, maybe a year and a half. It's been a little bit challenging with COVID, admittedly, but we're really super happy to actually be able to have speakers from all over the country as a result of the COVID and being able to do virtual meetings. So, gosh, any news or updates about our guild? We are, our board of directors met just last week, and we're working on a couple of things, including a possible t-shirt. I think Michael will be excited about that. And we're also looking for a new location. The restaurant that we used to meet at in Lodi was pretty small. We were already outgrowing that, but now we really need to find a spot where we can meet and we can practice social distancing if needed. We have a lot of our members or a lot of our guild participants who really want to get together in person. We're social people. So what we're looking for is a place where we can meet in person, the folks that want to meet in person. And then we can actually still do our meetings virtually, meaning that we can still project them, which I know sounds kind of funny, but we're going to try and blend, I think, possibly the two together. So we're looking for someone who might be a lodge member, maybe you're part of the Elks Lodge, maybe a veterans hall, maybe even there's a church that you go to who has a meeting room that we could use the second Thursday of every month, night. And then we're also looking for sponsors for our Zoom costs. So every one of these meetings, every month, we have to pay $15. And so right now, we have enough in our little bank box, thanks to pollen patty sales, that we're able to put these on. But we would love to have a sponsor for each of our Zoom meetings. So if you would like to donate $15 and be a sponsor for our September meeting, as well as October and November and December, that would be fantastic. And then just a reminder, we do have a private Facebook page. And really what this page is intended to do is to be a spot where people can come together and they can network and ask questions in between the meetings. It's for people that are local as well, because we know that beekeeping is local, right? So we want those folks to be able to share information that's local to them and for people that have attended the meeting. So if you'd like to join that private Facebook page, please let us know. So tonight, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about feeding your bees in the valley summer. And we have a very special guest speaker. Dr. Nino is the coordinator of the Honeybee Research Facility at UC Davis. We are very fortunate to have her literally in our backyard. And her background includes honeybee biology, health, and reproduction. You can take a look at her education there. Entomology is her thing, and she loves honeybees. So we're really thrilled to have her with us. And so with that, I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen. And there we go. Nina, if you want to go ahead and share yours, we'll put all this technology together. And just a reminder, everybody, if you can just keep yourselves muted. You have questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and add them to the Zoom group chat, and we will monitor those and possibly answer them towards the end. And it looks like we have a couple of people that can hear, so that's great. All right, there we go.
So I'd love to share my screen, but you need to allow me to share my screen.
Oh no! Okay, hold on. Let's see if I can do it. Let me go to advanced sharing options. Okay. All right, give it a try.
Let's do it. Yep, perfect.
Yay!
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Okay. Let's see, I'm going to see if I can share the sound too, because I do have some videos. Let's see if I video. Perfect. Let's see if this is going to work well. So hopefully everybody can see the screen that I'm sharing. There's supposed to be a pretty sunflower on there with some bees, which are actually not honeybees. They look like megacylids. So hopefully, as I said, you all can see that screen. And as Sherry mentioned, we'll talk a little bit about honeybee, specifically honeybee nutrition. We'll talk a little bit about native bee nutrition as well, but just very, very little within the context of some of the research that we're working on. And I sort of have this discussion, I don't want to say broken into, but within the discussion, we talk a little bit about basics of honeybee nutrition, and then I try and go into some of the research that we're doing, as you said, in your own backyard at UC Davis here with several of our collaborators. And since I'm talking about collaborators, I just want to jump in and mention that often, because I am sort of the person that's out there, I'm the extension specialist, I'm the one that most of you do see on pretty regular basis. I do want to remind everybody that I'm not the only one at the UC Davis who does work with pollinators. In fact, we have a really strong group of pollinator researchers. Some of you might be familiar with Neil Williams. He's our native bee specialist and pollination biologist. Brian Johnson is also working on honeybees. He's the honeybee geneticist and behaviorist. Rachel Vanette, she is working on plant pollinator interactions, and she's doing some really neat work looking at how microbiome of the nectar within the flowers, including the different crop species, actually impacts the attractiveness to pollinators. And she's also doing some interesting work on microbiome together with Lisa Tell of hummingbirds. So we have a really great variety of research that's going on. And then we have Santiago, who's working on orchid bees. He's also looking at the pheromone production, a little bit of honeybee Africanization. And then Stacy Coombs is looking at sort of flight physiology of bumblebees and other bees. And then some of you are probably familiar with Dr. Eric Musson. He is my predecessor. He's still around, although I think his wife finally said, no more, you can't retire and then go back into work. But he still comes around every so often. He definitely goes into some of the bee meetings. I'm really glad that he's still around here. And in addition to our UC Davis researchers, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but if you were at the lab recently, or if you have been at the lab in the past, I guess, couple of years now, maybe you've noticed these trailers as you turn onto the bee biology road. Maybe you've noticed these trailers right before the facility. And those trailers are actually now finally occupied. This is the new USDA Bee Lab in Davis. And it has two new honeybee researchers, Dr. Arathi Seshadri, who's doing some work with phytochemicals and how they impact honeybee health. And also Dr. Julia Fine is mostly focused on toxicology and how various pesticides impact honeybee health, particularly queen reproduction and queen mating abilities. So we have a really nice group of researchers, again, not just honeybee focused, but really a group of researchers working on supporting pollinator health in general. And of course, we all know that as much as we love honeybees, there are other pollinators out there that are quite important to us as well. A little bit about the lab, my own lab. The goal of the lab, again, is to characterize some of these biotic and abiotic stressors that are potentially affecting honeybee health. And in addition to that, we don't want to just say, okay, we poured some pesticides, they killed the bees or they did something bad to them. The idea really is to work towards developing solutions for the beekeepers and supporting bee health. So there's quite a mix of research that's ongoing in the lab. And honestly, when I first came in, primarily, I was interested in understanding the health of reproductive individuals in the colony, but as the needs of the beekeepers are wide and broad, that's how sort of our research developed as well within the lab. But today, I will focus a little bit on a bee food supply. Sherry, we're in the drought here, and I will then go into some of the research that we've been doing on understanding how we can promote supplementing food resources to the bees, both in agricultural and urban settings. And of course, I'll talk a little bit about some of the work we're done with probiotic supplements, and also a little bit of work that is actually currently ongoing on phytochemicals together with the USDA researchers. So let's go through the basics. So what do honeybees need, right? Of course, hopefully all of you know, and if not, if you're new, honeybees need sugars. They need carbohydrates, of course. They need proteins and lipids, which will provide them minerals and vitamins and various micronutrients, as well as water. So here are some nice photos, and I've learned, I'm going to see if actually the video now works. Nope, I clicked the little box to optimize the video, but the videos don't necessarily work so well on Zoom. Let's see if this will work. I just want to show it because it's such a cute little video of a bee just foraging. Hopefully, yeah, there she is.
There we go.
Collecting some nectar, and she also is has some pollen on her rear legs as well. So again, the bees need carbohydrates, they need proteins, lipids, and all variety of micronutrients, which I think are probably the least understood needs of the honeybees. And they need, of course, water, and that's quite important. And you'll hear this, everybody talks about this over and over again, how important the water is to provide to the bees, especially during the dry times when they might not be able to provide or find that water out there when they're out in the world, right? So providing water is quite crucial to the bees. And in fact, anything will work. We have in the bee garden, we have soaker hoses that just kind of drip a little bit of water that the bees come to and take it away. If you're going to be setting up anything for water, make sure that there's something that those bees can actually land onto. So for example, packing peanuts work really well. Even sand, if you can fill up a water container with sand and then just have the water be sort of sitting a little bit on top of that sand, it works really well, and it actually really works well for preventing mosquito reproduction. So make sure you provide, obviously, water to those bees. So who does the foraging? Well, it's the bees that are older than about 3 weeks. However, it's pretty highly variable, and it really highly depends on the needs of the colony. So not just on the age of the bees, but the needs of the colony as well. So for example, earlier in the season, if the colony is in its growth phase, once the queen starts reproducing and producing all of that brood that actually requires a lot of protein, then the honeybees will go into the increased foraging mode. So if the population of foragers is low, then some of the bees or younger bees might actually transition into that foraging mode. And of course, we usually say that the honeybees will live upwards of about 6 weeks during the summer. However, that also is highly variable, and there are definitely some research papers that have come out showing that honeybees might not even live that long. So their lifespan might even be shorter than 6 weeks. And how do they forage? Well, we all know about the dance language, right? Again, probably a video that might not work. We'll see if we can force it into working. But this is just a little video of honeybees, and your honeybees, I cheated here. They're not giving the instruction on where the actual food is. These are scout bees that are dancing on top of the swarm. But the idea is the same, that these these bees are actually going to go out, seek the food out, come back and translate that information, or give that information to their foraging counterparts, and they'll go out, they will recruit other foragers, right? And they will go out and find those food sources and bring them back. Nectar, of course, is processed into honey when it's brought back into the nest. Not all of the nectar, of course, is processed into honey. Some of it is eaten as is. Its nectar is transferred to receiver honeybees. Of course, there are enzymes within the bee crops that are added during the process of sort of the transportation, and they're added to the nectar, which breaks down the sugars into other forms of sugars, right? And then the nectar is also dried, so they basically kind of stretch the nectar in their mandibles, and the other bees fan around it. They will dry out the nectar. Of course, we all know that honey needs to have moisture of about 18% to be able to actually persist without spoiling for a long time. Okay, so carbohydrates, again, are necessary for specifically for wax production. So we definitely promote that if you have packages that you get that during the time that there is no nectar flow, for example, you should add some sugar supplement of some sort or carbohydrate supplement to your colonies in order to promote that wax production and comb building. And during winter and dearth, of course, they will eat that honey that is stored. Of course, when I was working in Pennsylvania, the honey stores were, of course, used during the winter. As we were talking about it earlier here, honey stores can be often used during the dearth time. So if you go into your colony now, you might be seeing that the honeybees are actually eating those honey stores. Another thing that is interesting, and it's kind of gaining traction more and more, is the idea that the nectar actually contains these different phytochemicals which are involved in development of honeybees. Specifically, we know that there are some phytochemicals such as picoumeric acid. If you are not fed that chemical as a larva, you will become a worker, or you will become a queen. If you are fed the chemical, then you will become a worker. So in addition to royal jelly, there are outside nutritional micronutrients that are regulating this split between the workers and queens. And also there's a paper that came out not too long ago, last year. It was actually a paper in collaboration with Dr. Arathi Seshadri, who's now here at USDA, showing that some of these phytochemicals may increase pathogen resistance. In this specific case, they were working with nosema. So it looked like some of the chemicals that they used were actually reducing the nosema spore loads, and more importantly, they were lengthening the lifespan of the bees that were fed these chemicals. Right now, we are looking at several different phytochemicals as well to see how they impact some of the immune genes of the honeybee workers. We're looking also at longevity, still in cages, and we're hoping to translate that eventually into the colonies and track the long-term impact of these chemicals. And I thought it would be interesting to mention what chemicals we're using. So right now, we're using, some of these might not be really familiar with to you at all, but others are going to be very familiar. So we're using camphorol chemical. We're using picoumeric acid. As I said, it's already found in nectar. We know that. We're also using gallic acid. We're using caffeine. So I think that's one of the chemicals that everybody gets very excited about. And caffeine is, if you didn't know this, is found not only in coffee plants, but it's actually found in the nectar of citrus plants. So that's one of the reasons why we're testing caffeine as well. Okay. Pollen, of course, is needed for, as I mentioned, proteins, lipids, various micronutrients as well. It is used for brood feeding during reproduction. The nurse bees will take in that pollen that's stored. They will then use it to produce brood food, which brood food is essentially a lot of different proteins that are produced by the glands of the honeybee worker nurses. It also is beneficial to have really good nutrition, especially protein, for boosting immune responses of the bees. And it also can promote detoxification pathways. So it can activate those detox pathways, which can be useful in dealing with various pesticides that the honeybees might be exposed to during their foraging trips. One of the ways that I'm really fond of this photo, and I took it from Randy Oliver's website, and this is one of the ways you can tell if your colony has good nutrition or if you need to provide specifically pollen supplement or protein supplement. And it's looking at the brood, whether it's a wet brood or dry brood. Dry brood clearly doesn't have that nice jelly underneath the larvae. They look like they're dried out and that they're about to just dry out and die. Whereas the wet brood has the larvae sort of floating on the bed in the pool of that jelly, worker jelly, right? And those larvae are really happy. That means that the nurse bees have sufficient pollen supply or protein supplement supply, that they are able to support whatever the queen is producing. And again, this is really essential for colony growth, especially in the springtime, summer, and even going into the winter. You want to make sure that those winter, I say winter loosely here, but you want to make sure that those bees going into the later parts of the season are strong and that they do indeed have plenty of food. So the brood and the worker bees are actually healthy and are better able to deal with whatever stressors they might be having to be exposed to. Okay. Water, we already sort of covered that. Make sure that you provide a water source if you know that there are no other potential water sources around. And I'm not talking about your neighbor's pool, of course. So make sure that there's that water before you even bring the bees in. If you are moving the bees around or if you are starting a new package, for example, make sure that water is there. Some say that if you are even going into pollination, if you're taking your colonies into pollination, to talk to your grower or orchard managers and see if there's a way for you to work together to provide that water source for the bees. And in fact, I did have some angered growers come to me and say, you need to tell your beekeepers that they need to either provide the water source or they need to work with us so we can provide a water source for their bees while they're there, because otherwise they get in trouble. They go into water sources that they're not supposed to be going into. So really crucial, especially not only that they need it for drinking, just like we do, but they also require water for climate control within the colony. So in the summer months, and as Sherry said, we're actually going to be having about up to 108 degrees, I think, within the next 10 days as well. Really important to have that water source for the bees so they can cool the colony down. And in addition to water, colonies will also, and I'm sure you've heard this before, they will forage for propolis because it has antimicrobial properties. And the idea is that the bees will go out to collect these plant resins, right? They'll bring it back. They'll use it to plug up any holes that are not supposed to be there. And if they're in the natural nest, they will line the natural nest with propolis on the inside. And that propolis actually provides the suppression of some of the pathogens, as the work from Dr. Marla Spivak's lab shows. And it also helps promote, just promotes health within the colony. So there has been quite a bit of work, and I'm not sure why this has never taken off. There's been quite a bit of work done by, as I said, Marla's lab, looking at how the boxes could be modified to promote that propolis collection and propolis lining of the colony, because it does have all of those nice antimicrobial properties. They tested it, I believe, on American foul brood as well as some viral diseases, and it does seem to lower the presence of the infection within the colony. So again, I think it's just that beekeepers often don't like dealing with the bee glue, right? We don't like dealing with propolis, and makes it really messy and sticky, and everything just sticks together. But that's not necessarily the best thing for the bees. So I would say if you can deal with a little bit of bee glue and a little bit of propolis in your colonies, and you're okay with that, go for it. Let your bees bring in that propolis, and don't, I guess I think we kind of inadvertently ended up selecting for bees that don't bring in a lot of propolis. So just let them collect that, those pollen resins, bring them back, and it will help your bees be healthier. So this is not a surprise, I think, to anybody here, that there have been studies showing that natural nutrition is the best, right? Natural nutrition will definitely help bees deal better, or help them deal more successfully with various infections, even pesticide exposure, right? Viral infections and whatnot. But it's often a challenge. So it can really be challenging to actually provide that natural nutrition, especially in places like where we are here in California, Central Valley, Sacramento Valley, because we do have issues with drought. I actually just gave a talk yesterday to a Maryland group, and they were talking about how wonderful it is that they have now goldenrod nectar, and they mentioned another plant, I can't remember, but there's so much goldenrod nectar, and they were bragging about it. So I was a little bit jealous about that. But as I said here, it can be really challenging to provide and have that natural nutrition, and especially because in California and in this area, we have quite a high concentration of colonies as well. As a group, I would recommend you should, I'm sure, I know that there are many of you there who have been beekeepers for a while, probably. Some of you might be even master gardeners. I know that we get a lot of overlap with folks who are just simply into plants and gardening, and now they've taken up beekeeping. So harness that knowledge and start putting together sort of a calendar of what are the plants that are blooming at what time, and what types of plants are actually present at specific times during the year, and if they're bringing in nectar from them, or pollen, or both. It can be very valuable to you as a club, especially as you're growing. You can provide that information to your younger, newer incoming beekeepers. And just simply watch to make sure that your foragers are bringing in the food and they're storing it. And if you check your colonies regularly, again, pay attention to that dry versus wet brood, and pay attention to whether the colonies are bringing in, when they're coming back, are they coming in back with pollen? Look at the honey supers, right? Are they getting heavier, or are they getting lighter? And some of you might even be working with some of the newer technologies that are out there. So for example, I know that folks will put scales underneath their colonies, so you can actually track and see if the colonies are getting lighter or heavier, right? Or if they're kind of remaining the same. So those are some of the options for you to monitor if the bees are getting the food that they need. For bee gardening resources, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but if you're trying to promote plants that are beneficial to the pollinators, not just honeybees again, but pollinators in general, we have a really great bee gardening resources webpage from the honeybee Haagen-Dazs garden. And if you have not been, I'm pretty sure some of you are here in Davis, and if you have not been to the garden yet, I highly recommend that for you to go out there, check out the garden. It is open. We don't provide tours during the COVID, but we are open, and you just need to make sure that you bring your little sanitizer, and of course, practice social distancing. But we have some really great resources for the plants, that a lot of them are California native plants. They're drought tolerant plants, and we have little plaques that say whether they're nectar or pollen provision, or both. And what are actually, we even have a little bit of information on what are the water requirements for those plants. So again, really valuable resource for you. So in California here, we often have to provide carbohydrates, especially even starting as early as June sometimes. With some breaks, of course. I think recently, well, not recently anymore, but I forget, it's August, but we had some star thistle blooming, which bees, of course, love, and we love to eat the star thistle honey. What we feed right now to our bees, it's actually not sugar water. We transitioned to ProSweet. And the reason I'm not promoting ProSweet for any other reason, but the fact that it doesn't spoil as quickly and we can just buy it in large totes and store it outside, and it does really well even in high heat. And again, it doesn't go moldy very as quickly as sugar water does. If you are just using sugar water, which is what we were using before, for the comb building, they need the light syrup, right? So 1-to-1. And for storage, if you're preparing them for dearth or winter, if you're trying to get them to put on that honey. Now it's not honey, and I know it's not honey, but if you're trying to have them put or store that sugar water for provisions later, we recommend you do 2-to-1 sugar to water ratio. And of course, there are various supplements that are available for purchase for you. I already mentioned ProSweet. You can purchase high fructose corn syrup. There has been some research actually coming from UC Davis from Dr. Brian Johnson, and I think Eric Musson was involved with some of this as well. They didn't find any negative effect of high fructose corn syrup on the growth of the colony. And I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly how long they tracked it, but it didn't seem to have a negative effect, I think, in comparison with some of the other feeds that we're feeding. So one thing that you do have to worry about, especially when it comes to high fructose corn syrup, if you're feeding, but this should be the case with any of the sugar supplements, that it can turn into this hydroxymethylfurfural. I always have a hard time pronouncing that, but for short, HMF, because it can be toxic to bees. So if the sugar gets heated up to a certain point, it can start breaking down into this HMF and can be toxic to bees. And you can actually purchase a little device that you can use to test what is if you have HMF in your sugar. And there are some papers out there. I'm not sure if they're open source or not, but if you are interested, I can send you some of that information via Sherry. And then, of course, some people will use fondant as well. For us, we're again using mostly liquid feed because it's easier to deal, easy to distribute, and then in the during the summer you don't have this sticky mess that's sitting on top of your frames. Of course, I actually had a question by somebody. Somebody texted me quickly asking about California buckeye. Those are the California buckeye can be toxic to honeybees. I think there's still a bit of a debate whether it is nectar that contains a toxin or whether it's the pollen. Some say that it's pollen because it seems to affect brood, but honestly, bees have a really good way of detoxifying a lot of the toxins that come through before they actually feed it to the brood. So the point being, if that's the only source of food for your bees, you're in trouble. But if it's a buckeye with a lot of other food sources, basically you could be okay. You would be okay. One of the options for you, if you're concerned about California buckeye, for pollen at least, you can always put a pollen trap on your hive. Just make sure that you're actually supplementing your colonies, if that's what you're doing, that you're supplementing your colonies with some sort of pollen supplement if you're concerned, again, about California buckeye pollen. Feeders, there's a variety of feeders out there. Who knows what else people will come up with. We transitioned from top feeders, or the feeding cans that go on top of the colony. Right here, usually there's a hole, And then you'll see quite often the commercial beekeepers around here. If you've noticed recently, I think the most recent crops were safflower and sunflowers that were blooming. But you might have noticed that there are a lot of colonies still with feeders on top. So we used to use that. But then the feeding cans that we had got old and they were just leaking left and right. So what we did, we transitioned into these internal feeders, in-hive feeders, and they seem to be working pretty well. And for us, it's easy because we only have a limited number of colonies. I think we right now have probably not more than 200 colonies, so it's easy to fill them up. But there's a variety of entrance feeders as well, and the top feeders, which basically that's my take on what these top feeders should be used for. And if you use them, don't get offended, but I think they're just cumbersome. And you put the feed, especially if it's liquid feed, obviously it's meant for liquid feed. You put the feed inside that top feeder, and if you're trying to get back into the colony, it just can make a mess because you have to move it and it sloshes everywhere. So a variety of those are available. You can decide what works best for you. But again, usually the feeding cans and entrance feeders or the in-hive feeders are pretty common here. Now, when it comes to supplements and in terms of protein, they're, again, very important during the buildup period and brood development. There are a number of them as well. Beekeepers, if they're taking the colonies into pollination, they'll start feeding these pollen supplements fairly early in the season because they're trying to get those numbers of bees to go up. They're trying to boost the brood production. Another thing you could consider doing is collecting pollen and storing it, or you can just make your own pollen supplement. And there's actually a number of recipes that are online. Folks will use part pollen, part soy protein, brewer's yeast. So there, as I said, a lot of different recipes out there, and then you can really come up with your own as well. And again, supplements are available for purchase, both dry and wet. One of the things that you should consider is don't try and feed your bees out in the open, because that could be a good way of transmitting diseases between the colonies, right? So monitor your colonies. Of course, that's the most important thing, especially if you have fewer colonies. It's easy for you to go and check them pretty regularly. And of course, the more you do this, the more you will understand the nectar and the plants that are producing nectar and pollen at various times during the year. And as a club, as I said, I think you could probably benefit from recording some of that knowledge that folks already have within the area where you are, or starting to record that knowledge now. And times, you know, with the climate change and times are changing, so things might be shifting a little bit. So it's really good to start talking amongst yourselves. And as I said, keep some sort of a record of what plants are blooming when, what they're provisioning. Monitor your foragers. Again, that's really easy way to see if they're bringing in pollen. And then if you're not certain, try feeding the colonies. And if they eat it, feed them more, right? If they take up either protein or sugar supplement, then feed them more. One thing to be careful, especially if you're, which I'm sure you probably don't have issues with small hive beetles, but by some chance, if you do have issues with small hive beetle, make sure that if you do put the pollen supplements on and they don't eat them, the honeybees don't eat them, remove them just to prevent the attraction of small hive beetles. Again, you're pretty dry. I doubt that you have any issues with small hive beetles. I know we don't have any issues with small hive beetles. Every so often we'll see 2 or 3, but if you're living closer to the Bay Area, you might have problems. Okay, so which one? That's the question. Which one do we feed? Well, there have been, as I mentioned, some studies, namely Randy Oliver probably has been the one that has done the most comprehensive work on evaluating the variety of supplements, as many as, what does he have here, like up to 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, including the no supplement control, of course, and then the regular pollen control, which is in yellow. And what he found was that none of them seem to be as perfect as pollen in terms of sort of long-term effect for the colony. This is This was a colony strength over 88 days, right? But there are some that come close to it. And again, I'm not promoting any of these, I have to say, but you can take a look and sort of decide for yourself. The point here really is that some of these, or pretty much any of these, are better than not feeding anything at all if they need it, right? So make sure that you check your bees and feed them when they need it. And I'm saying this, it sounds pretty obvious, right? But I have definitely had folks after talks come up to me and say, well, I don't want to feed anything that's not natural for the bees, but I will leave it at that. I highly promote you feeding your bees if they need it. Again, the natural nutrition, I put this slide back on there again because natural nutrition, if we can promote that, is the best. And this is the reason being because honeybees, just like us, need a diversity of pollen sources or diversity of protein, lipid, and micronutrient sources. So they thrive on a variety of different food sources. Oftentimes we'll give them something that looks more like this. So this is just one of the orchards where we've done some of the work, some of the research, and it's an almond orchard, and that's pretty much all that's available at certain times during the year, right? Almonds bloom in February. You won't find much else out there. Sometimes you will find these mustard fields nearby, but not all of the almond orchards are surrounded in mustard. So better nutrition is important because, as we already talked about, it improves immune and detoxification responses, and that helps the bees deal better with a variety of stressors. So I'm going to switch gears now, and instead of talking about what bees need as nutrition or for nutrition and what they use it for and some of the basics of bee nutrition, I'm going to switch into talking a little bit about what we have been doing as researchers to promote better nutrition for pollinators. This is work that has been done in the past 2 years with Dr. Neil Williams and Dr. Quinn McFrederick, who's down at UC Riverside, as well as Kirk Anderson, who some of you might know from the USDA lab in Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. He's done quite a bit of work on microbiome of honeybees, so he might be a fun speaker as well to bring in. But we've done the work, we've done this project where we had designated almond orchards, worked and collaborated with orchard or almond growers, and had orchards where these growers planted either this mustard mix from Project Apis M, or they planted these wildflower mixes, or this wildflower mix that was developed by the Williams lab. Now, one of the differences between these two is that Project Apis M has definitely targeted honeybees with this mix, whereas Neil has attempted to provide food and food supplementation both for honeybees, but also native bees as well. And of course, for the remainder of the project, we had matching controls that did not have supplemental forage associated with the almond orchards. We had in 2017 32 colonies, which I know admittedly is not a lot, especially if you have them split between 4 treatments and 4 sites, 4 different sites. But we did increase these numbers the following year. So we repeated the study and doubled the numbers of colonies. So we have evaluated quite a few of them over time. And this was done in Yolo and Colusa counties. Actually, I'm not sure why that arrow is not reaching all the way over there, but Yolo and Colusa were the places where we went. So colonies were tracked for various health parameters and size parameters before the bloom of almonds, during almond bloom, and of course after bloom. And after bloom was done, so the almond bloom was done, we moved all of the colonies into a common apiary, and then we continued tracking them for the rest of the year and into the next year. The parameters that we measured, and this is actually Bernardo, some of you probably know Bernardo, but he was tracking the colonies, or he was measuring the resource use. So we collected pollen that the colonies were bringing back in to confirm that they indeed were feeding what we were expecting them to be feeding on. We also tracked the colony growth in terms of adults and brood. We also did weight measurements during the first year, but that quickly got really, really messy. So we kind of dropped the weight measurements because we didn't have continual weight tracking. We would actually go out there, take the colony, put it on the scale, move it back. So it got, as I said, very messy. We, of course, looked at the varroa mite infestation and collected samples for pathogen load, bee gut microbiome analysis, and then immune competence, or basically looking at the immune gene expression and how these bees might be better able to deal with pathogens that they're exposed to. And 2017 was a challenging year. I don't know if you remember it, but 2017 had a lot of water associated with it, which is good, but it was not so great for us doing our research. It was pretty wet, so it was difficult to have these colonies in water, and oftentimes we weren't able to get to them, unfortunately. And also it was pretty gloomy, so a lot of the folks were really concerned about how the bees will go out and pollinate. So that was a challenge for us too, because we were, our counterpart, Neil, was tracking the honeybees and counting honeybees in the almond trees as well as in the associated supplemental forage strips. So what we found when we looked at the foraging pollen, or the pollen that the bees have collected and brought it back, and I'm going to just tell you right now that I'm going to be focusing on talking only about the mustard and the associated control orchards for the rest of the talk, because wildflowers, while they did bloom, they bloomed late. So they bloomed after the almond bloom was done, which means that a lot of the beekeepers would have pulled their colonies out of almonds at that point. So what we found was that colonies were indeed bringing in what we were expecting them to bring. So if you just focus on this graph here, on this bar, gray is representative of the mustard pollen, and they were indeed in the mustard treatment. They were bringing in mustard pollen, so significantly more so than in just almond orchards. There were, however, some other plants that the pollen was brought in, which is actually a good thing. We weren't so concerned about that messing up our data necessarily, but it's actually a good thing to know that there are some other plants that are blooming out there. If you ask me, I'm sure there will be a question, what are the plants? I can't answer that because I really don't know. So again, they were collecting what they were supposed to be collecting. And it showed in it kind of translated into colony growth. So during a couple of times during the almond bloom and right after the bloom, we did see that there's a significantly higher number of adult bee frames. So frames covered in adult bees, right? In those colonies that were that had access to mustard, and the same was seen with brood. So looks like at least long or shorter term benefits are simply an increase in colony strength, which is beneficial to the growers, not just beekeepers, but growers as well. The more brood is produced, the more foragers are deployed, right? Which could potentially improve the pollination. We did not confirm this, but that is the idea, right? Mites, of course, that's the next question. What happened with mites? There were no significant differences between mite loads between the different treatment groups, which is not necessarily what we expected to see anyway. But the bigger question is, what is going on with some of these pathogens? These are, believe it or not, bee viruses. So these are, I can't tell you what it is because most of the viruses that are bee viruses, RNA viruses, are of the same size. So I really don't know. I can't tell the difference in the microscopic photos, right? So we have to use molecular techniques to discern which viruses are in the bees, and that's exactly what we did with our samples. We looked at several different viruses, and I'm only just showing you a few of the results, but they pretty much track the same trend. DWV and black queen cell virus, as well as the nosema. There were no differences between the treatments over time between any of the groups. So now you might say, well, Elina, there goes your theory. But interestingly enough, even though there were no no differences in the pathogen loads, at least the pathogens that we checked, seemingly the colonies that had access to mustard supplements at least lived longer, significantly so longer, later in the season than those colonies that did not. So there is a benefit seemingly with the, even if the viral loads are the same, the immune ability of the honeybees that have been exposed to a variety of different pollens, maybe even earlier on in the season, can translate in long-term benefits later on. We did hope to replicate this in 2018. And as I said, we actually did do that. We were hoping for better weather. That didn't seemingly happen. In fact, it seemed to be a little bit worse, but we did it anyway. And we actually had pretty similar outcomes when we were looking at a variety of parameters that we measured before. We didn't see significant differences here when we looked at the mustard versus the matching typical control. So this grouping here versus this, I'm not going to talk about these two because it will just end up confusing everything. So if we look at mustard versus the control, matching control, there were no significant differences. However, at the end of the season, those colonies that had access to mustard, it had at least average of 3 frames more of adult bees than the matching typical control. So even though in statistical terms, there is no difference, it's a big difference to a beekeeper if a colony is going in strong with 3 frames more than the colonies that were not, didn't have access to mustard. So we can talk about biological relevance of this, right? Same thing with the survivorship. Again, mustard, those colonies that had access to mustard, they lived much longer. And in fact, 100% of them survived at least 180 days after the project or after the almond bloom, right? So I think that I would say that is good news for both beekeepers and growers. Now I'm going to shorten this a little bit, and I'm not going to go into details of the next project that we're hoping to work on, or that we're planning on working on, that we're currently working on. But the idea for this project is that we want to incorporate the landscape context for bees. So we want to think about the entire landscape, and within the landscape, when we're talking about it, we have benefits coming from various plants in form of good nutrition, but we also have associated risks. So the idea is to incorporate both benefits and risks of a specific landscape and see how that impacts the honeybee colony health. So we partnered with folks. You might be thinking, why is there Pennsylvania thing on here? But we partnered from folks from Pennsylvania, and some of you might be actually a part of this project, for better or worse. But we partnered with the group from Pennsylvania, and we are tracking, or you are tracking, survivorship of your colonies, and you're collecting surveys and submitting surveys and data of what you're doing with your colonies. And then we have a really fine scale maps of what are the foraging resources, what are the floral resources that are available to your colonies based on where your colonies are located. And we also have, which is really unique to California, we also have access to the pesticide use database. So any ag or larger registered pesticide applicator has to report when they're applying pesticides within the state of California. So we have access to that, and we can incorporate that information together with the surveys that you are submitting to us. And we can then sort of start parsing out what are the benefits and what are the risks within the landscape, or maybe even potential benefits or risks coming from bee management itself. So from us as beekeepers that are promoting bee health or not, and which ones are weighing the best or the most or the least when it comes to supporting bee health. So far, the data suggests that, guess what? Improved landscape is beneficial to bees when it comes to colony growth. However, the benefits are lost when varroa is not kept managed. So you can have the best landscape out there that you possibly can, but if you don't manage your varroa, you will most likely lose your colonies. And that's very similar and kind of mirrors what we were finding in our prior study in the almond orchards. So for those of you who are part of the study, thank you so much. And also, if you haven't submitted your surveys recently, please do so. I'm going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about another one of the projects. And I know that we are running out of time, so I'm not going to go into the details of it. And honestly, I wouldn't be able to go into the details of the project because there are so many plants that were tested and so many data points that were actually collected. So the idea will be to have a database for those of you who are interested in planting within your urban gardens, planting for pollinators, and you can see that database and see which plants would be suitable for promoting which bees. Although we're not discriminating here, right? If you want to plant for just honeybees, usually native bees, at least some of them will benefit off of it. But we definitely are looking at how different plants could be used for supporting a variety of pollinators. And this is the part of a larger grant that we are working on with Rutgers University, and this is our portion of the project, which are the commonly sold plants that bees prefer. Again, it's a 5-year study, so lots and lots and lots of data gathered. We're entering the 5th year of the study. And there were replicate plots of 15 commonly sold plants that were evaluated weekly. Of course, we couldn't have done this with without the great students that we had in the past 4 years. And they've performed 5-minute timed counts on these plants. So this is one of the plots that we have with the ornamentals. And we also performed weekly bee bowl sampling to collect the bees. These were the bees that were being tracked. Again, not just honeybees. And these are the plants that we had in our field plots that we evaluated. And again, I think Sherry mentioned that this is going to be recorded, so you can always go back to these specific graphs, but these are just earlier results that Dr. Christine Casey has collected in collaboration with her students. And the idea here is that there are certain plants that are preferred by honeybees versus other bees, right? So for example, if you look at this plant here, Perovskia, 3.18 bees compared to 0.05 honeybees per sampling event. So it seems like that plant is at least preferred by some of the other bees in comparison to honeybees. Of course, there could be some resource competition there too, but again, this could be valuable data sort of guiding the buildup or planting of various urban gardens. Now, in addition to looking at specific species of plants, families, genuses of the different plants, what Chris also has looked at is the shape of the flower, which might be a little bit easier to discern for you who might not be plant people. I'm not a plant person, but it seems that the bees, depending on what bees they are, prefer different types of flower, so the flower shape. And Chris looked at the flat flowers versus tubular flowers, right? So those flat flowers have been preferred by other bees, right? And those tubular flowers were preferred by honeybees. And this could be, the reason could be that honeybees might have slightly longer tongues, that they are able to get into that tubular flower and collect nectar more easily. And this is just the sample or a picture of the sampling grid and of course the bee bowl samples. Another area that was sampled was the honeybee Haagen-Dazs Honeybee Haven Garden. And the reason being because Dr. Robin Thorpe has had data about the bee species that were visiting the garden since 2008. And since 2008, he was able to identify over 85 different species of bees. So that's really impressive considering that that garden, I think, is only about half an acre garden. It does have about 250 or so different plants in it. And that's really crucial for creating a successful garden, to have a variety of plants that provide, again, both nectar, pollen, and plant at different, bloom at different times of the years. Similar data was collected from the established garden evaluations. Again, I'm not going to go row by row and talk about each of the plants. You can go back and take a look if anything sparks your interest. And similarly, we found the same or similar results with the shape of the flower as well within the garden. So again, if you have any questions, highly recommend contacting Dr. Christine Casey, who's the garden manager, or just visiting the garden website. Now, I'm going to talk just briefly about a couple of other things, and namely probiotics. Of course, recent developments in our understanding of microbiome and the bee gut microbiota has sort of sparked interest in how we can utilize that information to improve the health of the bees via supplementing them with probiotics, right? So this is similar to when you take antibiotics, doctor will might tell you to, hey, eat some yogurt because you want to reestablish that gut flora. So there's several probiotics that are already available on the market. Still not very clear how effective those are. However, I do know that there's research being done currently on evaluating those different products. So stay tuned. We're not doing it. It's a different lab group, but stay tuned for those probiotics. And one of the things that we ended up collaborating on is looking at how these probiotics might actually affect positively, hopefully, the American foul brood infection. And I just want to show you this video because it's pretty gross, to be honest with you. But this is the American foul brood that we ended up getting in one of our colonies, actually, unfortunately. But I guess it's a blessing in disguise because we were able to get this great video of the American foul brood rope test. So it is true, if you have American foul brood in your colonies and you find the right dead pupa, larva, you will be able to tell by this roping out test, and the slime, if you will, or that dead larva ropes out for an inch or more. So the idea is to see if the probiotics can help bees deal with these diseases. And there's some preliminary data that was done by our collaborators up in Canada, actually, University of Western Ontario, London. And they did find that when they use these probiotics in a pollen patty, it suppressed or reduced the pathogen load of the American foul brood, as well as the activity of the bacteria that causes American foul brood. So promising. So we partnered with them last year. We did a study 2019, and we tracked these colonies for the rest of the year. And we found that these colonies that were fed the bio patty with the probiotics seemingly collected and put on more weight and more honey, and they were stronger overall. So that's some promising, as I said, promising work coming from the collaboration here. Now, I don't want to keep you much longer. The only thing I do want to mention is the work that we're doing with potentially developing new bio control for plant diseases, which are not vector, but we would like to use honeybees to deliver these new novel biocontrol agents to crops to control pathogens of crops. So this is work done by in collaboration with Dr. Rachel Vanette and Dr. Flo Truillas. And all I want to say about that, and if it piques your interest, feel free to ask me to talk about it more. But all I want to say about it is actually this. The idea behind it is that the bee walks through a dispenser that has the isolate of the good microorganism mixed in with some powder, and it flies out, picks it up on its hairs. You can see the powder right here on the hairs of a bumblebee, and it delivers it to the flowers while foraging and drops that good microbe to control and outcompete the pathogen. So this is a workshop I went to in Serbia last year, 2019. They're really big on growing raspberries. And here's a really exciting video, and people are excited about it clearly, of a bumblebee walking through that dispenser, coming out and going to pollinate some raspberries. So I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to show you the video here, and you can clearly see the bumblebee coming out. It might take a little bit, but you can see the bumblebee coming out.
She literally came out and then went back in the other hole.
In that white powder.
Oh no!
And there she is.
Hey,
And she is flying away.
Here.
Off she goes.
See how
but
dusted it
she's
is.
completely covered in the white
That's one.
powder. And we did in fact track her. Got to
We
the
should
flower
do
where
that.
she was
just
pollinating, and we collected the flower. There was definitely transfer of the microorganism. The one thing that I just want to point out is that if you look at the weather, it's pretty bad, right? It was chilly, it was rainy, it was gloomy, but that bumblebee still came out. So bumblebees are definitely more robust in terms of the weather conditions that they can withstand when they're going out to pollinate. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to, of course, thank all of the collaborators, beekeepers, growers that we've worked with on some of this some of these projects. Of course, the funding sources, the California State Beekeepers Association has supported quite a bit of this work, as well as the Almond Board of California. And I just want to thank you for inviting me and hopefully listening to me and hopefully not falling asleep while I was talking. But I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. And I see there's some chat going on in there. So I don't know, Sherry, if it would be easier for you to just maybe read off some of the questions.
Yeah, so yeah, I'd be happy to. All right, so I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to scroll down. Let's
Cut myself
see.
off. Sorry.
Oh, you got me. Okay. Oh no, that's okay.
Oh, good.
Okay.
I'm going to stop sharing. How about that?
Oh, okay. There we go. So let's see. The first one is, the first question is, can I put scraped off comb that honey nectar remaining, so cappings, directly back into the hive for reuse? I put scraped off comb that honey nectar with honey nectar remaining, like cappings, directly back into the hive for reuse. So I'm thinking that we might be talking about after he's harvested his honey, perhaps.
So is it the frames or is it the cappings? I would definitely not
like
put
the cap.
I would
like
not.
The cappings.
That would make a lot of mess, and I wouldn't do it. But some people might have done it, and it might have worked.
Sometimes I've seen people, they put it on a tray like out somewhere by the hives and then they clean it up.
Yeah, and just one thing is that I'm sure you guys probably are familiar that the open feeding is not technically legal in California, right? So be careful of that.
Okay. Good warning. Let's see. Okay, the next question I have is, how many hives can a square mile support?
One of my favorite questions that I don't have an answer to, because it completely, I mean, it really completely depends on what's available, right? You can have an environment that has a variety of flowers blooming all year long. And I don't think anybody has really truly measured that, because how do you measure it? It's not cattle, right? They fly, these are flying insects. But the idea is, I think the one colony needs an acre of forage throughout the year. So
yeah, it depends.
No, that's not true. So it really does depend. And I wish I had a better answer for that, but definitely something to think about and try and answer down the road.
Mm-hmm. So our next one is, will bees move pollen into the brood nest from stores on an outside frame?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think so. I think they will just go get the pollen that they need. I don't know if they would move it. I don't think that it's energy efficient to just move it and restore it, right? Don't think so.
Yeah. Let's see. Here's another one. Will old or scraped propolis be reutilized? Do bees reutilize that?
Yes, they will. And I know, I don't know how effective it is and what the antimicrobial properties are that are left over, because it does, I mean, if you keep it if you keep it in the sun, right, some of those antimicrobial properties, if they're protein based or whatnot, can be inhibited or dissipate. But I have seen bees come to my hives that I have hive boxes that I made a garden out of. As soon as I put them out there, the sun hit the propolis, there were bees coming, scraping that old propolis and trying to take it back and reutilize it. I know. I was going to say, I said no, actually, in one of the previous talks. If somebody asked, I was like, absolutely not. But I was proven wrong. And I'm not ashamed to admit it.
All right, let's see. What is the best or most easily sourced supplement? Apparently, this person is starting a new nuke on Monday to get to kind of get back into it after her other one, or his other one, might have absconded.
Oh, Carson. So, I mean, the best easily sourced supplement in terms of protein I mean, oh, I'm not supposed to be doing this, but what we do, how about that? What we do, we go to Man Lake and we purchase the supplement that they have and we put it in there.
Right.
I mean, honestly, you can also go into a health food store and buy some pollen that they have there. I'm not guaranteeing what's in there, right? But if you're really desperate, I would just go to Man Lake. They're open and it's in Woodland.
Yeah,
So,
they're really great. They've been supporting our club in a lot of ways over the last year and a half.
Yep.
So really a good thing. So someone would like to know if there is a video, maybe one of the students can do this, a video about how to use those hats and nets and how to tie them correctly, like the one that Bernardo uses.
the hats and
Yes,
yeah.
with the string.
Yeah, I know. We don't have the video of it, but if I had known, I would have showed you, but obviously I'm at home. So,
That's okay.
yeah, I don't think there's a video, but that's a good question. We could probably do a little video of it for you guys.
Your how to.
Pretty easy, yeah.
Another person is asking about the mustard, because that was very interesting about what you were talking about with the mustard plant. And she's asking,
The weed.
Is it the weed?
The brassicas, yeah, it's the brassicas that are,
Wow.
yeah. You can have
Okay.
the weedy brassicas as well will work, but the mustards that we're referring to is the mustards that you use for oils and such, right? Yeah.
Okay, for oil. All right. And then another person has asked, is there an easy way to obtain the seed mixes that you showed on the screen used by the Williams Lab and the Project Apis?
So it depends if you are a grower or not, or if you're a beekeeper who has a grower that you work with for taking your colonies in pollination. You could talk to your grower. What Project Apis does, they will work with growers and provide those seed mixes for them for free. They will also educate them on, well, not educate them, but they will work with them to figure out the best planting design for those mixes. And it's not just a mustard mix that they have a variety of mixes. So if you go on their website, you can see, but it's not geared towards a small scale beekeeper or a homeowner. But you can also go and see what's on the list and see where you can buy some of these. There are some of the, like, I think, is it pheasant? Not pheasant. Is it Pheasants Forever? No. There are some seed producing companies that will sell you specific seeds. And there's one in Winters, and I can't remember now what the name of it is.
We have a lot of great growers in this region.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that we might have some connections.
If you're,
we might have to work on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Connect with your growers and say, hey, don't you want to make your bees better?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We have a question about what a bee bowl measurement is. And so I wondered the same thing.
So I know, kind of skipped over it because people don't like hearing this, but bee bowl is basically yellow or blue bowls, yellow, blue, white colors that the bees are attracted to that have a little bit of soapy water in it. And the bee falls in, and then you can actually identify the bee, because then you collect it, right? So you can take it back into the lab and identify it down to the species, instead of just when you're looking at a flower, if you're not really that familiar with the bee species, it's really quick, it flies, right? So you can say, okay, that's a honeybee, carpenter bee, bumblebee, and then it kind of breaks down because the little bees, you need to collect them to be able to identify them. So bee bowl, usually you just leave it out there for a specific amount of time. The bee falls into it, and then you can actually collect it and identify it down to species even.
Got it, thank you. One person says that they are boiling water to dissolve the granular sugar for their bee syrup. Does this kind of method produce the HMF easily?
Yeah, I'd never use boiling water to dissolve the sugar. We always use just warm water, put sugar in it, and then dissolve. So I would avoid that.
And then what was the result of the study using the essential oil? Was it effective? And can you say what that oil was?
So You know, I have a paper ready to go, so I will be able to more confidently say what the oil is, but we haven't completed the work. This paper is based on just the lab work, but we haven't been able to complete the work. Last year, we got, well, not outcompeted, but beat to the punch, I guess, by folks who were working on ticks and repellency of this oil to the ticks. So they gave them the oil. This year we had issues with COVID, so we weren't able to do anything about it. But hopefully next year we'll be able to follow up. In the field, we had immediate, pretty good results, but it definitely needs to be, we need to figure out a better delivery method and then the dosage and the timing. So whether it's one application, two applications, so we have to play with that before it goes, you know, to market. But we're getting there slowly. I know it's frustrating, but it is what it
time.
is.
It's totally good. All right. Well, I think that is actually, those are all the questions we have right now. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for
thank you. Yeah.
For being a part of the, you know, for being so supportive of our club and also for giving us such great information.
Well, good. Yeah, and I'm glad I was able to join you, and I'm glad we're able to, but as you said, it's nice to see everybody on Zoom, but I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting you in person and seeing you in person and chatting in person. So Hedgerow Farm, that's the one, Hedgerow Farm. And I see Sandy had a couple of other suggestions, Camprath seeds and Manteca. So.
Oh, there we go. Okay, good deal.
Awesome.
Camprath. All right.
Yep. Thank
you.
Well,
everybody, thank you so much. Our next meeting is going to be on September 10th, so watch the Facebook page. Also, if you haven't responded to Michael, please do so as far as your contact info, or you can email us at bigvalleybeekeepers@gmail.com. So we'll get you all added on. So, all right, wonderful. Everyone check your bees, make sure they have water, and that they're doing well.
Bye.
All right, thanks so much. Bye-bye.